Could other laws, such as legislation legalising same-sex marriage, be under threat? Joining us is Sir Robert Buckland, the former Solicitor General for England and Wales. He's also a barrister and a Conservative MP. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you'll be able to demystify some of what's going on for us. Talk us through, first of all, in a broad brush, the implications of this landmark finding.
Well, the finding, of course, is the United States Supreme Court. That's the chief appeal court in the United States. What it was all about, really, Kay, was the absence of a federal law to regulate abortion and to allow abortion for women right across the United States. Congress has never passed a law. And the Supreme Court, about 50 years ago, in the famous case of Roe and Wade, said, in essence, there was a constitutional right that underpinned the right to have an abortion. This landmark decision was pretty bold. It overturned that decision. It said that there isn't a constitutional right to abortion, and therefore it's up to Congress to legislate on this or for individual states to decide. Hence the real concern now that many women across the United States, indeed across the world, have shown about the lack of access to abortion services in many parts of the US.
So we're going to spend quite a bit of time, 15, 20 minutes trying to unpack this so that it's clearer for people as a result. Because, as we saw from that debate, there are very strong emotions on either side of that debate. As of today, what does it mean for a woman in the United States who feels that she wants to have an abortion?
Well, there are certain states in the US, chiefly in the West and in the Northeast, which do have abortion laws that allow abortion within certain limits. That will continue. There are a number of states that have, as a result of this decision, already moved to restrict abortion. And it seems to me, looking at a map of the United States, there are large swathes of the country now where women would have to travel great distances and probably at great expense to have an abortion. That, in my view, does endanger lives. It does cause real concern and misery for many, many people. And I think it's up to Congress now, the legislature in Washington, to actually get on and do the job that, of course, we did in our House of Commons and Parliament 50 years ago with the Abortion Act. And
we will come to that, but I just want to unpick a little bit more about what's happening in the United States. A lot of laws and precedents, of course, in the US are interlinked, even acknowledged by Conservative justices. Look at this one, Clarence Thomas. In future cases, we should reconsider all of the court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, which is granting rights to contraception, Lawrence, that's decriminalising sodomy, and Obergefell, I think, legalising same-sex marriage. What does that actually mean?
Well, it's about a big argument between different views of the US Constitution. Judges like Clarence Thomas, Conservative judges, take a much more strict interpretation of the Constitution and don't like to see it being stretched in a way that they think defies its true meaning. Now, there are other judges, so-called liberal judges, who take different views and want to make sure that as society evolves, the Constitution evolves with it. That's one of the perils, Kay, of having a written Constitution, which, of course, was originally written 250 years ago. Amendments, this particular amendment, the 14th Amendment is the one that they really obsess about, passed just after the US Civil War. It will tell you about how a written constitution can be a wonderful thing, but it can also really be a minefield for lawyers and a field day for the sort of arguments that we see developing in the US.
So where is that leaving us, Robert, as far as things like same-sex marriage are concerned in the United States and contraception? Is it opening the door to potentially finding a problem with that as well?
Well, where there isn't a federal law about it, then the US Supreme Court is often involved. The Supreme Court can strike down laws as unconstitutional, but where they sort of get involved and are asked to be involved to, in effect, to legislate and to create rights, then this sort of problem will occur time and time again. And I think it's really important that those who are elected to public office in the US at federal and state level actually pass laws and debate laws that then create legal rights for people, whether it's same-sex marriage, gay rights, and indeed the other swathe of rights that, of course, are underpinned in our country by legislation passed in Parliament.
Yeah, whereas, as you're saying, in the United States, the US Supreme Court judges are political appointees, are they?
Well, yes, Kay, and we've all seen the spectacle of the appointments process where judges are asked about their perceived political opinions, and we get this, are you a Conservative judge, are you a Liberal judge? Now, when I was Lord Chancellor, that was something I really guarded against, because I don't think judges should be appointed as to their politics.
No.
They should be appointed as to their legal merit and the quality of their judgments. And I think in the UK, we are very lucky to have judges who aren't there because they're political. They're there because they're good lawyers.
So that's the situation in the US. A lot of women and men have been saying to me, could what happened in the US happen here in the UK? Because few people know that abortion is illegal.
You're right, Kate. There is a criminal offence of procuring an abortion, either by yourself or by somebody else. That's an Act of Parliament passed back in 1861. It's Section 58 of the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act. The number of prosecutions brought under that Act are very few. I was looking back through the records. There was one case brought in Northern Ireland against an individual who had a suspended sentence. That's because she wasn't able to access abortion services in Northern Ireland at that time.
Which we'll come on to with Northern
Indeed.
Ireland. Yeah.
So my view is twofold. I think having better access to clinical abortion and safe abortion services and safe family planning services is what women need and deserve. But secondly, the law, I think, could do with updating. I think it's important that we keep a law to criminalise those who might force women into an abortion or might procure it. We have coercive controlling relationships and domestic abuse. One can imagine, that sort of thing potentially happening, horrific though it is. But I don't think the pregnant woman herself should be criminalised.
What does the law say? What does the law actually say?
Well, it talks about an offence of procuring an abortion either by administering drugs or using implements. Frankly, it's very archaic language, as you can imagine, for the 19th century. And at the moment, women themselves are criminalised. I don't think that is right. I think that we should keep the law of procurement to deal with individuals who might be pressurising women and forcing them into a position of having an abortion. But I think the pregnant woman herself should not be criminalised.
And the pregnant woman who wants an abortion needs the signatures of 2 doctors.
Yes.
And that's up to 24 weeks.
Yes.
After 24 weeks, that doesn't count unless there are other reasons for that abortion to go ahead.
Yes, that's right. And as I was saying, the Abortion Act is now, 50 plus years old. It's applied in England and Wales and indeed in Scotland as well for many years. It's only now in Northern Ireland that we're seeing the law change to remove the restriction on abortion that applied there up until, in fact, this year.
What's the situation in Northern Ireland?
Well, now women in Northern Ireland will be able to access abortion services. The law is broadly the same. If anything, it's slightly probably more liberal, actually, now in Northern Ireland than it is on the mainland of Great Britain. However, the important point here is now we have a situation, unlike the US, where women do not have to travel between different parts of our country to gain access to abortion services, and I think that is right.
We've had a few questions from viewers about members of the government who are openly opposed to abortion. Come on to that in just a second. You are a Christian. How do you feel about it?
Well, I do believe that life begins at conception, but I think that to sit in judgment on the situations that many women, often very young women, face, the difficult choices they have to make, is not for me to do. And I believe, therefore, the law should allow access to services that can preserve the well-being of young women and their future lives and allow them that option of an abortion if necessary and where appropriate. I think that we've got the balance right.
Where does same-sex marriage fit with your Christianity?
Well, 10 years ago, I took a view that whilst I strongly supported civil partnerships for everybody, I was at that stage concerned about the concept of marriage and whether we were stretching it beyond definition. I think I got that wrong, Kay. I think that having seen what has happened since the law has changed and seen the joy actually that many couples, same-sex couples now can share through marriage, I think it's been a revelation to me, and I think it's something that I would now strongly support. I think faithful relationships sealed by a marriage are a wonderful thing, and that love is love, whatever type of love it might be.
So politicians can change their mind, however some choose perhaps not to. Jacob Rees-Mogg, for instance, back in 2017, he says he's completely opposed to abortion. Abortion is morally indefensible, life is sacrosanct and begins at the point of conception. And asked whether he opposes, whether that opposition, I should say, applies in cases of pregnancies resulting from rape or incest, he said, "I'm afraid so. If you have people with views like that in government, is there any person who feels that, you know, even if you've been raped or incest, you still must go ahead with the pregnancy?"
Well, I don't agree with Jacob about that. I do believe that life begins at the point of conception, but I do think that to ask a woman who's been the victim of a horrific crime of rape, and having prosecuted many of those crimes and met victims, I've had first-hand experience of what it does to people. I don't think it's right for us to sit in judgment and, in effect, to force people into a situation that was not their choice. And the important point here is that, of course, Jacob is a member of the government. We serve together in Cabinet. It is a conscience issue for MPs. It's not a party issue. When we vote on these issues in the House of Commons, it's on our individual consciences. And I think that that's the right system to have. It means that the pressures of the whips disappear and that one is left alone thinking about these things, guided perhaps by the views of constituents and others, and one is able to make a considered opinion. Jacob and I do not agree on that. However, there are many other issues that we do agree on, and you know, our moral consciences will hopefully guide us when we cast those important votes.
Yeah, there will be some concern, though, from viewers watching this morning that if Jacob Rees-Mogg openly says what he said, there will be others within government, within Cabinet, who will agree with him, but not potentially as openly as he has spoken for now. Should they be at all concerned, people watching at home, that we could find ourselves in a similar position to women in America?
I think it's highly unlikely. I think that the views of the Prime Minister are well known, as are many other members of the Cabinet. I don't see that sort of wellspring of view within my party, or indeed any part of Parliament, to overturn what is now very settled legislation, which I think is largely working well. I think the situation in the US is dramatically different because people do not enjoy the protection of primary legislation passed by its Congress, and that's what Congress needs to do.
Well, the reason I asked you is because Stella Creasy was speaking in the Guardian newspaper yesterday. I'm not sure if you saw it. Most women in the UK do not realise abortion is not a right, as we said, but there is only a law giving exemption from prosecution in certain circumstances. What the US teaches us is that we cannot be complacent about entrenching those rights in law.
Well, I'm always interested in what Stella has to say, and we do collaborate on a lot of issues involving women. What I'm taking from her comments is that she seems to be suggesting that perhaps there needs to be further entrenchment of abortion as a human right. I respectfully would disagree. I don't think that's necessary. The courts cannot strike down primary laws passed by Parliament. They don't have that power in the UK. I think it would take MPs to change their mind to repeal laws for the situation to change. If she's asking for a wider set of entrenched rights, I think that brings with it a whole host of problems, because the more you start to create those sort of rights, the more you're inviting, in effect, judges and the courts to come in and interpret them. And, inadvertently, I'm sure she wouldn't want this, we could end up in a position where we create a sort of US constitutional court here in the UK. And I think that would be a very retrograde step.
I think she might be referring to the British Bill of Rights. The Human Rights Act is set to be replaced with the British Bill of Rights. That's certainly what the now Justice Secretary was looking at last time he was on the programme. Is your government, I don't know whether you agree or not, allowing a loosening of human rights in the UK?
I don't think it is. I think that many of the changes in that bill are ones that I would have brought forward because I'd started the process of review and updating of the Human Rights Act, which is now over 20 years of age. I think there's a risk that we start confusing things by, in effect, defining certain issues, whether it's jury trial, which I strongly believe in, having prosecuted and defended in hundreds of cases, or whether by enshrining and elevating those particular rights, people are going to say, well, if you're doing it for that, why aren't you doing it for something else? And I think this bill is going to be vulnerable to a number of amendments on that basis. And as Conservatives, as a Conservative, I think we've got to be very careful about preserving our common law, our statute law, and the unwritten constitution of the UK. And I don't want to see a sort of, domestic set of rights that we create with good intentions that only sow more confusion.
So what you're suggesting is by not having the Constitution like they have in the United States, that makes us actually freer rather than more limited?
I think so. I think the tradition in our country is that we've been free to do everything that's not prohibited by law. It's like a cricket pitch where you've got the boundary which is defined, which is where the law sits. And within that, we are free to act as free citizens under the law. I think that's a far better system than having prescribed rights that can be interpreted by, let's face it, unelected judges who then are drawn into the political arena in a way that I think is bad for the judiciary and very bad for elected and democratic politics.
Now, this conversation came about because I spoke to you because I was seeking your guidance on what was happening in the United States, what the rules were here, and whether there could be, some sort of fluidity between the two. And as part of our conversation, you talked to me about you're going to Harvard to talk about artificial intelligence. Now, tell me about that.
Yes, well, I'm going to be a senior fellow at the Mossover Rahmani Centre for Government at the Harvard Kennedy School. It's a part-time unpaid role, which I will be largely doing from here in the UK. And I'm going to be doing research into artificial intelligence and what it means for the concept of justice itself. Do you know, Kay, in China, the Chinese authorities are now using algorithms to decide cases. So instead of having a judge, AI is deciding cases. Now,
wow.
That's a big thing. And so far, we've been looking at it from a technological point of view. But I think there's an ethical dimension here, surely.
Surely.
The power of AI is immense. It can liberate us in ways that perhaps we don't even fully understand. But here's the thing. If we don't start to set rules now about what it can't do, we might find that we're behind the curve and that we've lost control of this. And I don't know about you, but I want to know who programmed the algorithm, what goes into the algorithm, what then influences it as it develops, and if it starts to take on, if you like, a life of its own, which is not inconceivable in the near future, what does that mean for justice? Is it one human being sitting in judgment or another, or are we being judged by forces that ultimately become beyond our control? Now, I know it sounds a bit...
Can we find that happening here?
Well, AI is already being used to help with legal research and to look at documents and to prepare complex cases. I think that's very innovative and powerful, and I think digital technology is where we need to be. But I think that before we embark any further on the encroachment of AI into justice processes, we need rules. And I think we need international rules, because if we're recognising judgments from abroad, are we recognising judgments that aren't actually the product, ultimately, of a human mind? And I think these questions need answers, and that's what I'm going to be helping to lead in my work with Harvard Kennedy School. Amazing.
We're almost out of time, like 30 seconds to the end of the show. I just wondered if you had a thought on the Scottish referendum, second Indie Ref 2. What do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting that Nicola Sturgeon's taking it to court even before she's passed an Act of Parliament. I suggest she's probably pessimistic that she's going to be allowed to have the power to have this referendum. A general election is a general election. It's not a referendum, and any attempt by her to pretend otherwise, I think, is bogus.
How interesting. Fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time to indulge us with so much of your time. Thank you.